Good morning from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 9:28 a.m. on the 14th of March 2025. I thought I'd continue reading from The Dream Fighter and Other Creation Tales by Ted Hughes. And today's story is titled Gozzie. To amuse his mother, God invented the little fluffy yellow gosling and gave it to her. She was very pleased. Its comical little eyes at the corner of its beak made her smile, and she loved its soft, broad, purplish webbed feet that waddled along with their toes turned in. It followed her everywhere. At night it jumped onto her bed and slept as close to her as it could get. It was very proud to be the pet of God's mother. While the other birds watched from bushes and trees or from high in the air, Gosling waddled along at her heels. "Well," he would say to himself, "aren't I the lucky one?" And the birds would mutter to each other, "How did he do it? What's so special about him?" Even as he grew bigger and his yellow fluff became grey feathers, he still followed God's mother everywhere. And she still called to him constantly. "Come on, Gozzie, have a nibble." And she would feed him some delicious little bit of something from her fingers. "He's lucky," rattled Magpie, "but wow, isn't he ugly? And what a voice." It was true, Gozzie was ponderous looking. He looked too fat for one thing, and as he grew bigger, his fat belly sagged deeper between his legs. But he didn't care. "Jealous," he'd quack. "Absolutely everybody is jealous of me. Sometimes even I'm a little jealous of me." And he laughed. Whack, 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 whack. "Ugh!" cried the owls, covering their ears. "You could be good for one thing," chattered the starlings. "God's alarm clock, with a bit of practice at getting the time right." "Jealous," quacked Gozzie. But it was true. His voice was not pretty. His voice, in fact, was ugly. It worried him a lot. Sometimes, when he was sitting in the grass close to God's mother, perhaps when she was peeling mushrooms or shelling peas, he would think, "How is it I'm so lucky in everything, yet have such a horrible voice?" And sometimes he would listen to thrush in the evening, or robin, and he would feel so miserable he would actually weep. Then he would think, "If only I could sing like that, I think I would exchange everything just to be able to sing. Yes, if I could sing, I don't think I'd mind living in the rough old forest or out on the windy river." Then he would go down to the river and swim a bit, dipping his head under the water so the other birds wouldn't see that he'd been weeping. If only God had given him a proper voice. Soon he was thinking about his voice all the time, worrying about his voice. I can't sing. I can only honk and yodel in a cranky way and quack. I'd sooner be a fish. God's mother had no idea, of course, that her darling pet was so wretched. He never told her. He never breathed a word about it to anybody. He was too proud. One day it was announced the creatures were having another song contest. Everybody was wildly excited as usual, all except Gozzie. "Oh no," cried Gozzie. "I can't bear it. Oh, I think I'll go and stick my head in the mud of the riverbed till it's over." The birds were sure the winner would be a bird. The animals, the reptiles and the insects had their champions, but they all secretly suspected the winner would be a bird. Which bird? A favourite was nightingale. A close runner-up favourite was skylark. Another was, missel thrush. But suddenly, a sensation. Everybody was talking about water snake. Water snake was a new creature. God had never meant to give water snake an unusual voice, but something went wrong in her making. A lucky accident. Anyway, the result was water snake had an absolutely stunning voice. A delicious, liquid, heart-stopping voice. When she lifted her head up between lily pads and sang a melody, even alligator's tail curled slowly upwards in an agony of pleasure. Yes, the beauty of water snake's voice was so keen, it was painful. When she draped herself on a floating log in some backwater and sang a full song, practicing for the competition, even God found himself rooted to the spot. Wild Bull set his brow to the ground and leaned on it, groaning softly. Flying Beetle lost control of his wings in his effort to listen. He fell into the grass and lay there, legs in the air, just letting the song happen to him. Got the storm clouds out in the south, and yet here it's so sunny and blue. Odd. Other kinds of snakes that were coiled in trees became limp and simply slithered loosely to the ground, lying there maybe on their backs, motionless as long as the song lasted. And nightingale, skylark and missel thrush and the other favourites fell silent. It surely was an incredible song, but nobody was listening so hard or so painfully as Gozzie. Yes, for Gozzie, that song was pure cruelty. "Oh," he sobbed in the reeds. "Oh, oh, oh, if only, if only. Why, water snake? When God made me for his mother, couldn't he do me a favour? The voice isn't much of an extra. If I could have sung for her, his own mother. And he plunged his head into the mud beneath the water, but straightway he lifted it out again, not to miss a note of the song. Magpie decided to take action against the new rival of the birds. He flew out over Water Snake. "Hey, Knot-neck," he bawled. "When you stop singing, do you know what? You vanish into ugliness. Your ugliness is so impossible, you're invisible. We can't help hearing you, but do we have to look at you?" Woodpecker joined in with a laugh. "Hey, Creepy, you've won a prize for the wettest worm and the droopiest drape. Give us another spaghetti solo." Then Kookaburra came with an even worse laugh. "Nice of you to sing for my supper," he cried, and dived down, great beak wide open, to catch and gobble Water Snake. She dived underwater in a flash, but only just made it. After that, these three birds made Water Snake's life a misery. Whenever she lifted her head out of the water to practice her singing, these three came flying, and Kookaburra made a grab at her. "Seems like Water Snake's not in the running anymore," the birds said. Meanwhile, Gozzie's heart was breaking. At last he couldn't bear it any longer, and he told God's mother. She listened in surprise. She had never guessed. "You poor darling," she cried at last. "Why didn't you say something before? Of course my son will make you into a singer. You just leave it to me." And gathering him up, big as he now was, she took him in to God, and she told God what was making her pet so unhappy. Gozzie simply laid his head over her shoulder and sobbed openly. "Well, who'd have thought," said God, and he dropped into his chair. Gozzie's grief was so plain to see, God was quite upset. "And what can I do now?" God asked helplessly. "Once he's got his voice, he's got it for good." "You're God, aren't you?" cried his mother. "Simply give him another voice, a standby, any kind of decent singing voice. You're the creator. Think something up." "Well, I'll try, said God, and he leaned his brow on his hands. "You'll have to give me time, though. It's not going to be easy." What on earth could he do? But then, as his mother went into the kitchen, crooning over Gozzie, God noticed a movement down in the corner of his doorway. It was Water Snake. She had managed to reach God without being seen by the birds, and now she told him her tale. Her tears splashed onto the floor. God sat listening, deep in thought. What a day! First Gozzie, now Water Snake. It was all getting too much. At last he burst out, "But what can I do? So the birds scream insults at you whenever you sing, and Kookaburra tries to grab you and gobble you up. Can't you stay silent underwater? You're a water snake, remember. And waste my beautiful voice?" cried Water Snake. "Can't you get rid of those birds?" "Certainly not," said God sharply. "Not once they're made." "Why don't you make me a bird?" wailed Water Snake. "Then they'd be on my side. It's all because I'm not a bird." When Water Snake said that, God slapped his brow. He had a sudden brainwave. "Wait!" he cried, and he called his mother and asked her to bring in Gozzie. Gozzie, who was now a big, heavy goose, came waddling in and stopped, craning his beak towards Water Snake. Water Snake curled up into a tight ball and peered out from between her coils. This looked like another bird to her. "Now," said God to Gozzie, "here is Water Snake." I know," moaned Gozzie, "the heavenly singer." "Well, how would you like to have her voice?" asked God. "Me?" gasped Gozzie, and he jerked up his wings as if he might fall over. He couldn't believe his ears. After all, this was God speaking. God did not make jokes. "Wait, wait," cried Water Snake. "What's going on?" And she uncoiled and writhed herself into a tangle of question marks. Her brows came down and her black eyes scowled from under them. Her tongue flashed like a little whip. "Will you be patient and listen?" said God. "Both of you." Then he explained. He would remake them into a single creature. So Water Snake, inside Gozzie, would be a bird, and Gozzie, with Water Snake inside him, would be the singer of singers. Atavism, alchemical transmutations. Guess God, technically, metaphorically, metaphysically, can do anything that energy wants. Let me think about that. Also, I'm not so sure that God doesn't have a sense of humour. Created humans after all. Anyway, where were we? Sometimes I have to pause to think about things. Keeps my mind active, I suppose. Keeps me questioning and remaining awake and aware. Question everything. Right. Gozzie blinked. The idea of having Water Snake's voice drove every thought out of his head. That voice coming out of his mouth. "Oh, please," he sobbed. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. Oh, could it really happen?" But Water Snake let out a screech and went lashing all over God's workshop like a firecracker. "Never!" she screamed. "Never live inside that stupid, ugly-looking goose. The birds say I'm ugly only because they're jealous of my voice and my beauty. I'm a beautiful black whip of water lightning. Oh, I am, and I love being me." "Listen," cried God. "Why don't you listen? Let me finish." Water Snake lay in a tangle as God went on. "I will make Gozzie the most beautiful of the birds. He will be perfectly beautiful, more beautiful than any other beauty, beautiful without a flaw. And you will be gazing out through his eyes, seeing the whole world gazing, amazed at you. And singing through my mouth, whispered Gozzie, seeing the whole world listening. Oh, please, please. The other birds, said God, will no longer insult you. They will adore you. They will worship you. And with your voice, you will be, well, you know what you'll be. You will be the absolute star. Water Snake's tongue flickered. Maybe I'll just try it, she hissed. But if it doesn't work, try it, said God loudly. Good. Close your eyes, both of you. Then he tossed Gozzie and Water Snake into his furnace of creative fire, brought them out magically white hot, and with his magical hammer on his magical anvil, pounded and bet the two shapes into one. The sparks flew. It all seemed to happen in a flash. His mother brought a bucket of water up from the holy well and poured it over the finished creature with a crash and a great explosion of steam. And there it stood, the new creature, in a puddle of water, bigger than Gozzie and white as fiery new snow. And there, peering out from under its brows, were Water Snake's black eyes, and Water Snake's black skin was there too, over the great webbed feet. It turned its head on its snaky neck. God's mother saw how snaky her Gozzie had become, and when it looked at her, she knew this was no longer her Gozzie. God planted his big mirror in front of this new creature. The head reared up, and out of the beak came a long hiss. Horrible! It was Water Snake's voice from the great white bird's throat. Let me out! Let me out! But you're incredibly beautiful, cried God. Look at you. You really do look like an angel. You look like a bride in her lace. I don't, cried Water Snake. Look at my great fat body. I look like Gozzie, only bigger. Let me out. Nonsense, said God. You'll get used to it. Just stroll down to the water, but sing as you go. Then you'll see what the birds do. They'll fall out of the trees with surprise. And remember, you're gorgeous. Gozzie's great feet waddled out into the garden and down towards the river. As he went, he stretched up his neck and hissed. Not a word came out, not a note. Sing, cried Gozzie to his voice, but all that came out was a funny sort of grunt. 'Twasn't even a honk or a quack any more. God frowned, rubbing his chin. He watched Gozzie swim out onto the river. Give us a song now, he called. It will sound wonderful over the water. Gozzie stretched up his neck, but again all that came out was a hiss. What's wrong? Where's the voice? Shouted God. When you let me out, cried Water Snake, then I'll sing. Till then, I'll sulk. In that case, shouted God, getting angry, you stay in there till you sing. Now sing. Not till you've let me out, screeched Water Snake. Sing, ordered God. When I say sing, you sing. Never, 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 screeched Water Snake. Never till you let me out. God clamped his jaws tight shut and glared at the white shape on the river. Gozzie dipped his neck and upended his whole body, as if his eyes and beak were trying to bury themselves in the mud at the bottom. You've done it again, said God's mother, shaking her head. Poor little Gozzie. You're right, said God. If ever I made a mistake, there's one. It will need a new name, said his mother. Said God. His mind was a blank. What on earth should he call such a mixture? Let's leave that to man, he said at last. I don't want to make another mistake. Man might get it right. The next story is called How God Got His Golden Head. Poltergeist lived in God's workshop. Where had it come from? It had no idea. It lived inside an old candlestick that God had carved long ago from a piece of driftwood. God never used the candlestick. Nowadays, if he worked after sunset, he worked by the light of his own eyes. So the candlestick sat up on the shelf, collecting dust, and Poltergeist lived inside it. Don't you all start up again just because I'm mentioning your name. Gotta watch them. I get very excited if I give them any attention. Just say. I particularly play up when I have visitors, which is awkward at times, especially new people who don't know me very well. Well, it's sacred space, it is what it is. Or do they stir up Jared when he visits me? And Crystal gets taken over sometimes, but, well, I haven't seen her for, since September 2023, so don't have to worry about that anymore. I had to depossess her, which was not pleasant. Not pleasant at all. Anyway. Poltergeist had no shape, no weight, and not even God could see it. Am I a him? It asked itself sometimes as it watched God bent at his work. Or sometimes, When it saw God's old mother moving about in the shadows of her bedroom, it thought, maybe I'm a her? It could fly. It loved to swoop around the workshop. It loved to fling things from one end of the room to the other. Most of all, it loved to hear things go smash. Yes, I'm still very angry about you smashing my Royal Dalton Aries plate. That was worth a lot of money. That was not cricket. I'm not happy with you. Don't ever do that again. That was back in 2020, by the way. Whew. I suspect it was David Davidson. They're both Aries, and anyway, that's the link there. I could be wrong. Could have been anything or anyone, but I blamed it on him. Anyway, where were we? Sometimes, when God's mother brought him a cup of tea, the cup would rise from the saucer, empty itself over God's head, then shatter itself against the ceiling. Poltergeist would laugh silently and flit back into the candlestick. Another time, when God went into his workshop one morning, he found the whole room upside down. There he was, walking across the ceiling and looking up at the floor above him, with his chair, his workbench, all upside down above him, and still on the workbench was his nearly completed centipede. Was the centipede having to cling, or was it just somehow lying there? With a great effort, God twisted the whole workshop round. And got it the right way up again. Goodness, such mischief. And got it the right way up again, with the floor under his feet. But now he saw something peculiar. In his mirror, everything was still upside down. How could that be? He gripped the mirror in both hands, and with a terrific effort, he twisted everything in the mirror to get it the right way up. And with a bang, he fell onto the ceiling. Now everything inside the mirror was the right way up, but the workshop was upside down. On the shelf, the upside-down candlestick tittered. Again, with an effort, God got the workshop the right way up. But once again, everything in the mirror was upside down. He turned the mirror's face to the wall and looked at the candlestick. He knew there was something very funny going on in his workshop, and he knew there was something funny about that candlestick. Was there a connection? Sometimes Poltergeist tried to take a hand in God's work as it watched him working away, creating his wonderful creatures one after the other. It longed to do the same. One day, God made wolf. Before he'd quite finished it, he sat back, pondering. Somehow this animal was turning out too gloomy. He sat there on his bench, glowering at him. "How can I brighten you up?" murmured God. For answer, the wolf yawned. But as it yawned, a blazing log from the fire soared across the room and disappeared down the wolf's throat. The wolf gave a yell and all its hair spiked on end. God managed to grab it and hold it while he reached inside and pulled out the log. But the wolf was now on fire inside. Its eyes glowed and the froth boiled out of the corners of its mouth. "What now?" cried God. "Oh Lord, this is a mess." "Something to drink," cried Wolf. "Quick, oh quick, a drink." God tried water. It was no good. He tried treacle. It was no good. He tried milk. No good. God tried all kinds of things, but he had to go to bed at last, leaving the wolf chained to the leg of his bench, lying there in the dark with blazing eyes and lolling tongue. When God came into the workshop next morning, Wolf was nowhere to be seen. The chain lay there and the empty collar. Then God noticed a few hairs sticking up out of the neck of his brandy bottle. He picked up the bottle and peered through the glass. There was his big wolf, crammed into the brandy bottle. Its eyes seemed to squirm, pressed tight against the glass inside. Carefully, he broke the bottle. Wolf burst back to its full stretch and shot out through the open doorway with a yowl. The candlestick chuckled. This time, God heard it. He grabbed the candlestick, strode to his doorway, and hurled the wicked object as far as he could. Instantly, with a crash, all the glass of the window behind him showered in over his bench and the candlestick rolled across the workshop floor. "Tricks!" bellowed God. "I'll settle your tricks!" He snatched up the candlestick again, strode again to the doorway, and again, harder than ever, with all his strength, hurled it at the far sky. With a ringing crack, it hit the back of his own head and bounced away over the workshop floor as he fell onto his knees, watching a shower of stars. Carefully now, he put the candlestick back on its shelf. Then he stood at his open door, rubbing the back of his head and frowning and listening to the wolf running through the deep forest, howling for whatever it might be that would quench the flame inside it. Soon after this, one afternoon, God was dozing in his chair. Often, in the middle of his work, he would doze off like this. Some of his best ideas came to him in these little naps. He yawned and felt a tickling inside his ear, Putting his little finger end in his ear, he felt a big round lump of earwax simply sitting there in the porch of his ear. He half woke, looked at it, yawning, and idly flicked it away across his workshop. By sheer fluke, it hit the candlestick, bounced to the floor and rolled. Before it had come to a stop, God was asleep again. But Poltergeist was awake. It peered out, and its gaze fastened on the ball of earwax. "Did you knock?" it whispered. It floated out of the candlestick and sank to the floor. Close up it gazed at the earwax. It poked the earwax. It picked up the earwax and gently rolled it between its palms. Was this a little bit of God? Out of God's own ear? It was still warm with God's warmth. It was golden, like a kernel of sweet corn, and it was quite soft. Poltergeist suddenly had a wild idea. It would make a creature out of this earwax. Poltergeist almost laughed out loud. It would make a creature not out of clay like God, but one out of a little bit of God himself. A creature made out of God. At the very idea, Poltergeist shuddered with excitement. Oh, the frisson, the frisson! It had always wanted to make a bird, a swift, swooping sort of bird like a swallow. It started to shape the earwax, wings and a tiny streamlined body, then the face. But as it worked, it remembered God's wolf. What if it made a tiny wolf, or better still, a dog made of God? This time, Poltergeist did laugh out loud and stared at the thing in its fingers. But then, in mid-laugh, it stopped. The thought about the wolf dog had got into the earwax, and there it was, with wings like a bird, but with a little snarly face and fangs like a wolfy dog. And it was now very nearly black. That was all the dust from living so long in the old candlestick. Poltergeist gazed at what it had made. Actually, it looked quite interesting, different from anything else, but Poltergeist liked that. The creature had no life, of course, but that didn't worry Poltergeist. Stealthily, it placed the tiny beast of earwax on the back of God's sleeping hand, and with a plink, like a snapping harpstring, shot back into the candlestick. When God woke, he found himself looking at the tiny snarler on the back of his hand. At first he thought, I've dreamed another monster, this time a midget. That sometimes did happen. Warthog had arrived like that. One night God had dreamed of a wild pig with a face like the root ball of a torn up tree, and it was trying to tip him out of bed. Next day, he got the shock of his life when he walked in his garden and met Warthog itself, rooting up his tiger lilies and crunching the bulbs. But now he saw that this new little creature had no life. So where had it come from and what was it made of? He had to admit it was beautifully formed. Has my mother made it, he wondered. Surely she would have given it life because she too had the gift of giving life. He blew the breath of life into its face. The creature squeezed its eyes shut, then suddenly took off. It dithered about the room. It could fly all right, but it seemed to spend all its energy trying not to hit things. God smiled. Practice hard, he said. Practice makes perfect. Then he went on to work on Desert Rat. The newly made creature bet its wings wildly. It had no idea what it was or where it was. It saw a wall spinning towards it, then a ceiling, then a floor. Every beat of its wings brought something rushing towards it. Or at least that's how it seemed to the little beast as it swerved and dodged and doubled back. It kept seeing God bent at his work. And suddenly, in mid-whirl, it had a brainwave. If only I could get into his ear, there I'd be safe. So it tried to attract his attention, flying to and fro in front of his face, between his nose and the desert rat, and crying, "Let me live in your air." But this voice was so thin, God could not hear it. It was really a poltergeist voice. The poltergeist could hear it, and he smiled silently as he watched from his candlestick. Then the wolf swallow, or whatever it was, thought it might just as well fly straight into God's ear whether he liked it or not. But at that very instant, God snatched it out of the air and tied it to his harp by one of the broken strings. "There," he ordered, "rest a while. You're getting on my nerves." The harp leaned against the wall at the back of God's workbench. For a moment the wolf swallow hung head downward, peering up at the string tied round its ankle. "What's happening now?" he thought. "This life is all surprises." Then he tried to fly straight at God's ear, but the string round his ankle jerked him back and he bounced fluttering against the other unbroken strings of the harp. A shower of plinkety twangling notes showered out of the harp under the strokes of the wings. The wolf swallow couldn't believe his ears. He fluttered at the strings again, and another shower of notes sprinkled around the room. He laughed. He suddenly felt joyful. Now he felt really alive. He forgot how dreadful it had been, reeling about in the air with walls and furniture spinning towards him whenever he turned. He flitted again over the harp strings and back again and to and fro, making the notes tumble. God stopped his work and listened, astonished. He knew he had never heard music like this, and yet somehow It was familiar. It was a haunting, eerie music. Actually, it was partly poltergeist music, but also partly music from God's own eardrum. Nobody had ever played God's eardrum, so God had never heard the music hidden in it. Inside the candlestick, the poltergeist clapped his hands and hugged himself tightly and rocked to and fro with delight. But much as he liked this music, God had soon had enough. Enough, he commanded. A rest now, a little peace now. But the wolf swallow would not stop. He had not had enough. He danced over the strings, flinging his wings, whirling on the end of his leash, hurtling to and fro across the harp like a mad hand, or like a mad glove, rather, in a storm of notes. "Joy!" he cried. "Joy! Joy! Oh, oh, oh!" He wanted to go on forever. But God could not hear his cries of happiness. He caught him again, untied his leash, and was just about to toss him out through his open doorway into the world when he got a shock. When Wolf Swallow saw that the glare of daylight in the doorway, he knew more than ever where he wanted to be. He twisted from God's hand and like a black flash flew up and straight into God's ear. "Ah!" cried God and clapped his hand to his ear. Then tenderly he wormed his finger end into his ear as deeply as he could. Too late. The fluttering beast had gone right in, and as God wriggled his finger end, probing deeper, the creature fled in deeper. And now it was right inside God's head, skittering about among his thoughts. God clutched his head and strode about the workshop. "Oh!" he cried, and "Ah!" and "Ee!" He turned his mirror to see himself, and there was his own bewildered face, upside down, with the upside down hands clutching his head. Then the creature dived down through his body into his heart. Suddenly it felt at home. Everything here felt familiar and friendly. And here he found something even better than a harp. He started hurtling about inside God's heart, playing his heartstrings just as he had played the harp on the bench. But here the music was far deeper, stranger, richer. "Wonderful!" he cried to himself as he hurled himself about among the strings. And the more fiercely he played, the more excited he became. But God felt all this was an awful sensation. It was more than he could stand. He couldn't hear any music. All he knew was the ghostly plucking and twangling, the fluttering wings of the wolf swallow right inside his heart, as if his heart itself were flying about on wings inside his ribs. He bet his chest with his fist, trying to drive the crazy creature out through his mouth. but it wouldn't come out, and it wouldn't stop. He roared like his own gorilla, pounding his chest. His mother came running in. She stood there helplessly, wringing her hands, watching her mighty son hurl himself about the workshop, beating his chest and roaring as if he hoped to blow his own heart right out through his mouth. God looked at his mother with terrible eyes. "What shall I do?" he wailed. "What's the cure? Don't you know the cure for this?" She only went on, wringing her hands, and all the wrinkles around her eyes began to shine with tears. "Ask the earth," she said at last. "The earth's the wise one." God almost fell out of his workshop. He stumbled onto his hands and knees and crawled over his lawn. He bet on the lawn with his fist. "What's the cure for this?" he roared. "Tell me the cure for this." Then he kneeled up and grappled at his chest with his great hands. It was as if he had a fire in there, like the wolf. Only this wasn't a flame. This was a living and fluttering shadow with a bird's wings and a wolfy head whirling inside his heart. The earth suddenly spoke. For a second, God managed to hold still, and he heard, "Ask the moon." God ran to the top of the nearest hill where, as it happened, the full moon was just rising. "Moon," he shouted, "what is the cure for this, whatever it is?" His mother could see him outlined against the full moon like a mad dancer, and she heard the moon's whispering reply, "Ask the sun." God uttered a roar of anguish and disappointment, but he set off, bounding over the ridges of forest and the ravines. And the wolf swallow played more wildly than ever. He couldn't tell what God was doing, but it seemed to him that God was dancing, leaping up and down, with now and again a somersault. So the wolf swallow played louder and harder. He uttered thin howls of ecstatic joy. It seemed to him the more wildly he held himself into his music, the more wonderfully he broke into huge new gulps of music, grander and more vast. "More!" he howled to God. "More! More!" urging him to leap higher, to dance more madly. But God only cried, "Oh, this is horrible," as he stumbled across the world to where the sun was sinking behind the sea. "What's the cure?" he bellowed. "The cure for this?" And he beat his chest as his bellowing shout ended in a roar that seemed to shake the flat, resounding shine of the sea. The sun was silent a while. Then the voice came out of the centre of the fiery ball. "The cure," said the voice, is severe. Anything, shouted God. I don't care. Anything. And again his shout ended in a bellowing roar, and he pounded his chest. The cure, said the sun, is to put your head into my furnace. What? Squeaked God. He couldn't believe what he'd heard. Pardon me. Also, his voice was wearing out. At that moment, the crazy player inside his heart flung himself into new efforts. He knew God had become still. He thought he'd simply stopped dancing. So now he tried to get him going again, dancing again, with new rhythms. He strummed and slammed, he plucked and leaped. God placed his hands in the sea and leaned forwards towards the sun. But with all his courage, closing his eyes and wrapping his hair and beard around his face, he thrust his head deep into the white, hot furnace of the sun. For a few moments he thought he'd made a shocking mistake. Surely, he thought, I'm going to burst into flames. I'm going to explode like a barrel of petrol. He could feel all his atoms glowing towards flashpoint. But then he realised his heart was quiet. From inside his heart, the wolf swallow was gazing into the glare of God's head. I've got two crows, I call them Heckle and Jekyll, and they're on the front gate and they're squawking and cawing and putting up quite a din. It's delightful. Right, where were we? But then he realised his heart was quiet. From inside his heart, the wolf swallow was gazing into the glare of God's head. He did not like this at all. And as the glare became more intense, and the sun's great heat began to brighten through God's body, he became afraid. He felt his wings growing soft. They no longer plucked at the heartstrings. A sudden, terrible fear came over him. As the dazzling glare surged down through God's neck and shoulders, he suddenly knew he was going to melt. He had to move fast. God felt a peculiar sensation behind his knee. It moved down into his ankle. It writhed across the sole of his foot, under the skin. With a puff of smoke, the winged and wolfy-headed creature of earwax shot out from under the nail of his left big toe. It whirled down to the earth, a falling black star, and plunged through a crevice into a deep cave. It hung itself under the ceiling in a dark niche, panting. God pulled his head out of the sun. He had been bright before, but now he glowed, as if his head itself had turned into sun. All his hair and beard dazzled whitely and vibrated like the element in an electric lamp, like white-hot white gold. And his face glowed like pure, new, polished gold. He came back to earth and stood on the hill behind his workshop, listening. From far away, among all the evening hubbub of earth's creatures, he could hear a new sound, a tiny thudding. He smiled. It was the heart of the mad musician, the wolf swallow, hanging upside down in the damp dark of its cave, squeezing its eyes shut against the terrible memory of the sun. This was Bat. Now he comes out only after the sunset. He hurls himself about, plucking at invisible strings. He is remembering God's harp and the music that poured out of it under his wild flying. And he is remembering God's heart and the fantastic music he'd played inside there that had made God himself roar and leap. Right, thus concludes today's readings today. I'm very tired, I don't feel all that well, and it is what it is. I'm trying to work out what's wrong with me these days, apart from my bladder playing up and feeling very wrung out indeed. It's all a bit odd, people of earth, but it's my life as I know it. Never really can tell whether I'm going to be well on any given day, or well enough anyway. So it is what it is. One of my kookaburra friends is sitting on the bough of the golden rain tree watching me. I love how they keep me under observation. Anyone else would feel creeped out and stalked, but they are lovely. Very sweet how they watch over their mama too. Very sweet indeed. So on that note, have a beautiful morning. It's still morning here, 10:36 a.m. Afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are in the space-time continuum here on planet Earth. Stay free, stay wild, stay happy, and enjoy each day that comes. Each day brings its own magic. It's sacred space here. It's the kookaburras peering at me with intent. You kind of have to laugh. What you doing, Cookie? Watching you, Mama T. I've been watching you since early this morning. On that note, bye for now.